title of our sermon this morning is Saving Nineveh. And the takeaway, I hope, for this sermon today is in following the story of Jonah and putting ourselves in the place of Jonah, that we can determine in our mind the Ninevehs, the spiritual Ninevehs in our lives that need the Lord's mercy, the Lord's pity, the Lord's compassion that we call on. We'll be talking about what these spiritual Ninevehs are and what we can do to get focused and turn our attention to them. The book of Jonah is short, just 4 chapters, 2 pages in certain versions, copies of the Word, and yet it is full of these surprising twists and turns. The book is about saving the great city of Nineveh, and yet the drama surrounding this simple divine task gets complicated in a hurry. And it gets complicated because humans are involved, namely Jonah in this case. So chapter 1, which we didn't read this morning, contains the Lord's first call to Jonah. It's the same call as the second time. Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. But in that story, Jonah flees to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. Instead of going east, he goes west, the exact opposite direction. And you may remember some of the details. He boards a ship at Joppa, bound for Tarshish. A great storm kicks up, and there is panic. They throw all of the things that they can overboard to lighten the load of the ship. Then they cast lots suspiciously to figure out who might be the cause of this great calamity, and the lot falls on Jonah. Jonah, in this case, confesses to them that he is the cause. And he says, I know that the great tempest is because of me. And he's thrown overboard, and a great fish is prepared by the Lord, swallows Jonah, and he is in the belly of that fish for 3 days and 3 nights. That's probably a familiar part of the story. Chapter 2 contains this beautiful prayer to the Lord while Jonah is in the belly of the fish. Here's part of that prayer. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice, for you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the floods surrounded me. Then I said, I have been cast out of your sight, yet I will look again toward your holy temple. And so chapter 2 ends with the fish vomiting Jonah out onto dry land at the spot or the country where he was supposed to go. So then we come to chapter 3, which you heard read this morning. The word of the Lord comes to Jonah a second time. And this part is less familiar for people. Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and preach to it the message I tell you. And so Jonah does this, telling the people, yet 40 days and Nineveh shall be overthrown. But one of these twists and unexpected things that happen is that the people of Nineveh, this foreign nation, admit their wrongs, see that they have done wrong. The whole city. And the king of Nineveh says, let everyone turn from his evil way and from the violence that is in his hands. So there was a recognition, a collective or corporate recognition, that they had been going in the wrong direction, and they had not had the benefit of the Lord's word, the spiritual truths of his word. And it says, then God saw their works, that they turned from their evil ways. And so Nineveh was saved. And you would think, well, that's the end of the story. A happy ending, right? But no, there's more. And it has everything to do, in chapter 4, it has everything to do with Jonah's response to the people of Nineveh being saved. And that's the focus of today's sermon. Jonah's response to the fact that the people of Nineveh accepted the message that he preached and changed their ways. So interestingly, Jonah becomes both the protagonist and the antagonist in this prophetical book. Now, this might seem confusing, but this is because prophets in the Word can carry different representations depending on the context. Sometimes prophets represent the Lord or the Word, and sometimes they represent the state of the church, that is, people or us. So, for example, Jonah spending 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish and offering that beautiful prayer is a prophetic description of the Lord's temptations against the hells. And in the New Testament, the Lord uses this incident to predict his own death and resurrection. So Jonah, in this context, in the first half of the book, represents the Lord. But the second half, which we're turning our attention to today, in sharp contrast, we have Jonah here carrying a very different representation, where he refuses to look upon the inhabitants of Nineveh with any kind of mercy or compassion. And this we are taught in the teachings of our church. It represents the state of a fallen church. It represents what you could call a selfish mindset, which does not wish well to any but themselves. And for the family service today, I had a plant, big house plant there, and just had that visual image there for people to realize in that 4th chapter, here is Jonah obsessing over this plant that had given him protection for a day and then no longer protection because the Lord had given that worm to kill that plant. And the whole conversation is about, well, which are you going to pity? Are you really going to pity that plant, which you didn't really have any responsibility for in the first place in terms of it growing and then dying? This is the Lord challenging Jonah. Or are you going to pity the people of Nineveh who turned from their ways? And Jonah says, I pity the plant. I'm more concerned about that, which is a picture of what happens when we get wrapped up in ourselves, wrapped up in self-pity. So in today's reading, said that God's forgiveness of the Ninevites displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he became angry. And the Lord challenges Jonah, saying, is it right for you to be angry? And in essence, Jonah was saying, yes, it is. And then we read, but Jonah went out of the city and sat on the east side of the city, and there he made himself a shelter and sat under it in the shade, till he might see what would become of the city. So what was Jonah being asked to do? It seemed like a simple request, and yet he obviously had a strong reluctance to go to Nineveh. And more significantly, why, after the people of Nineveh repented of their ways, was Jonah still angry? Could he not be happy for their conversion? Could he not share in their joy? So we're taught on a historical level that Jonah, a Hebrew, was being called by the Lord to preach the word of God to a foreign nation, a Gentile nation, which in the text, Jonah clearly didn't want to do. And so as an aside, this is the beginning of us thinking about the spiritual Jonahs in our own lives. This is the task of a chosen people, to spread the word, the gospel. It's not to remain in the one location where it began. And it's the same with us. We are called to reach out beyond our own people, as it were, and move beyond our comfort zone. We are called to share our faith with people outside the church, with people who don't know the truths of the Lord's new revelation, to those who are in a Gentile state. But a Gentile state has a very broad meaning and can mean people outside of the church, and as one passage talks about, it can also mean people inside the church who, for whatever reason, have lost access to the truth. So again, the focus here is on the people of Nineveh. And the book ends with an unanswered question. Will Jonah let go of his anger and resentment towards the people of Nineveh who repented? Or will he stay unmoved, unconvinced that Nineveh is worth saving? And that's the way it hangs. We don't know. Why didn't Jonah care? As has been pointed out, Jonah had more pity for the withered plant that had protected him while he sat angrily outside the city than he did for the Ninevites. The Lord said, "You have had pity on the plant for which you have not labored, nor made it grow, which came up in a night and perished in a night. Should I not pity Nineveh, that great city in which more than 120,000 persons cannot discern between their right hand and their left?" Well, here Jonah, as already mentioned, represents the state of a fallen church. And so on an individual level, the point here is that he represents a selfish impulse that we all have. It's always lurking in the background, taking care of number one first. It's a daily struggle. But the point of today's lesson is that we don't have to act on this impulse. And as we get older and as we mature, we don't act on that impulse. And through experience, we would also say that the greatest antidote for combating self and self-pity is to reach out in service to others, whether that's our immediate family around us or extending out in concentric circles to people who need our help. It is the strongest antidote against the straitjacket of self-pity, which makes us want to declare this person or that situation irredeemable, like Jonah was saying, not worth saving. Listen to this passage from Secrets of Heaven, which talks about the Lord's love, which just cannot think like that or cannot operate like that. And the invitation is for us to try and adopt this kind of love, this kind of pity that the Lord has constantly towards other people. But it's referring to us too. People who are being born from the Lord, that is, being regenerated by Him, are receiving the Lord's life. The Lord's life is divine love, that is, a love towards the entire human race, which love is such that His will is to bring salvation, if possible, to the whole of it, that is, to all people. The beautiful thing is that when we call on the Lord's pity, the Lord's mercy, which wishes to save and draw all people to Himself, as that passage says, we look at Nineveh with new eyes. There's a church sign that I saw many years ago, one of our new church congregations. The wording of it has never left me. Come worship a God who lets a lot more people into heaven than you or I would. Just love that message. And it is a love that we can adopt. This is the message of this sermon, this text. You heard that third lesson, that to feel pity is to be alerted by the Lord to offer help. It's from Secrets of Heaven 67:37. Such a powerful and important passage. To feel pity, which we don't always feel, especially in our more selfish states, is to be alerted by the Lord to offer help. So now let's look a little deeper at Nineveh, that great city, and what it represents in our own lives. One way to think of this is that Nineveh represents situations or circumstances that we have considered irredeemable, not worth saving. I mean, we're experts at this, right? I'm done with that. I'm finished. I'm moving on. It's what we do so much of the time. And whatever the situation or circumstance we're in, we're tempted to give up and say that it's not worth it. So your Nineveh might be a struggling relationship with a coworker. It could be your struggle with a sibling or friend, or some aspect of your marriage or parenting, or a tense situation at work with your boss or supervisor. And in all of these situations, these Ninevehs, you just want to walk away from it, sit outside the city, wash your hands of it. But here's the thing. There is a spiritual principle at stake here. If you think about it, the only thing that we take with us to the other side is our relationships. Our relationship with God, our relationship with His Word, our relationships with each other, friends, family, marriage, work. And it is the quality of these relationships that matters the most. And the question is, are we investing the proper kind of care and attention that these relationships need? So like Jonah, the Lord challenges us to reconsider our position, saying, should I not pity Nineveh, that great city? The teachings of our church talk about Nineveh representing a Gentile state of mind, and I mentioned that briefly earlier. And if you think of a Gentile state of mind as being a mind that is moved and affected by what's called the good of charity, this is why the people of Nineveh were able to respond to the message from the Lord's word, was that there was a disposition there, a desire to do good. The problem was that there was a lack of truth. And so we can think of these Gentile states of mind or Gentile situations in our lives where there is a desire to do the right thing. The problem is that there is a lack of clarity, what we call ignorance. And even though ignorance sounds like a negative, ignorance is not a crime. We find ourselves in plenty of situations where we lack clarity, where we lack the truth. And in that situation that we call the Nineveh's situation, we may have this fog of confusion and ignorance. And it may not apply necessarily to the other person. We may be the person. It's not necessarily the other person that's lacking the clarity. It may be a mutual thing. But this is why we need to invest in these relationships that we are ready to write off. So Nineveh is a mindset that is very much redeemable for the simple reason that it hasn't yet had the benefit of hearing the Lord's word, of having a particular truth or teaching shine on it. Think of relationships where there is tension and where there is the threat of it blowing apart. Usually the cool, calm, come let us reason together, namely, let's shine the light of truth on the situation, has gone. And that's why you could classify it as a Gentile state. The truth has gone. Well, how do we bring the truth back into that situation? So take a situation in your life right now that you're tempted to wash your hands of or write off as hopeless, and ask yourself, has it had the benefit of light? Has it had the benefit of the Lord's truth shining on it? Have you prayed about the situation and asked for the Lord's pity, the Lord's mercy? Have you done the research and educated yourself about the situation? Have you got a second opinion? Have you talked to a trusted friend or confidant about it? Or, like Jonah, are you tempted to sit outside the city, angry and resentful that you have this annoying situation going on in your life? As mentioned earlier, the book ends with an unanswered question. Will Jonah let go of his anger and resentment toward the people of Nineveh who repented, or will he stay unmoved, unconvinced that Nineveh is worth saving? So the answer isn't given. Instead, we are left with a crucial detail, a reference to a common human emotion, a feeling that, contrary to the appearance, serves as an important catalyst for real spiritual change in our lives, and that is despair. After the plant that had protected Jonah from the sun, after it had withered and died, we are told that Jonah grew faint and wished death for himself and said, "It is better for me to die than to live." I'd like to read about this unlikely character in our spiritual development, despair. And listen to what this passage from Secrets of Heaven says. It was in our third lesson today. The primary reason why people undergo states of despair is so that the things of which they are firmly persuaded, originating in self, may crumble, and also so that they may receive the perception of what is good and true, a perception they are not able to receive until those false persuasions originating in self are, so to speak, softened. Our own stubbornness, or as this passage says, false persuasions, are what lead us to deem our Nineveh situations unsalvable. And this could be because of a lot of usual suspects, could be prejudice or a bias. It could be assumptions that we've made that are just completely unfounded. It could be because of ignorance that we've talked about. It could be by overgeneralizing the situation, painting with a broad brush. It could be because of a lack of curiosity. And it could be because we haven't done our homework and educated ourselves. I bring this up because we all have friends and loved ones who have written off God. They've written off the church or this church organization. And they've wandered away from the Lord and His Word into what maybe is a Gentile state. Because these are good people. Like Jonah, the Lord calls us to arise and to go to Nineveh. It is a challenge from the Lord for us to face our fears and to not go west, which is into obscurity, like Jonah did at the beginning with the first call, but go east towards the Lord. This call invites us to take a chance, to try again, to trust the Lord, and to speak the truth into that situation as best as you know how. So pick your Nineveh and commit to not giving up on it. The Lord doesn't give up on us, so why would we give up on the people or groups or institutions in our lives that we care about? But the spiritual ingredients seem to be pity. Take pity or have mercy or empathy about that situation and pray that the Lord may soften your heart. And then shine a truth, a teaching from the Lord's word that has come to you from prayer and reflection, and let the Lord do his redemptive work. For as the Lord says, should I not pity Nineveh, that great city in which are more than 120,000 persons who cannot discern between their right hand and their left? Amen.